Hello. We're starting early. It's 9:33 instead of 9:34. I know Adam Waite needs no introduction, but I do want to say thank you to Adam for being here and offering an adult faith formation class. Part 1. Part 2 will be October 30th. Adam is going to explain to us and get us excited about this Reparations royalty program. And you were on NPR's All Things Considered. No, Weekend Edition. Yes, he was. So we are in the presence of something. Anyways, join me in thanking Adam for offering this adult faith formation class. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, All right, friends. Good morning. It's so lovely to see you here, and I know there'll be more folks arriving as we go on. I was joking around with John Gerner, our live stream guru. I do have a tendency to want to walk and talk, and he told me that he is not contractually obligated to follow me with the camera all around the sanctuary. So if I want to appear on our live stream, I best be on my better behavior and stand in one place. But I do appreciate you all being close, and I can feel the connection already with your presence. Today's session is going to be a lot of me talking, which is not that different from a lot of other things that I lead at church. But I thought it was important that I tell you about my story as to how I, through the help of this anti-racism workshop that we did as a program staff, came up with this idea of a reparations royalty. I think context and hearing somebody's journey can be really instructive and helpful for us, especially as we all kind of wrap our collective brains around this idea. You know, I'm a firm believer that we've had no choice in the matter, right? We were, most of us, I presume there might be some people here that moved to this country, but we were all born at this particular time, and we were all born into this country, and that means we were all born into the problems that growing up in the 20th century in the United States of America yield, right? Now, of course, we have a choice in the matter. You know, we can kind of open ourselves up, awaken ourselves to those problems, but we're never fully formed, right? Just like in a faith journey, we're never fully formed. Such is our work in this anti-racism, or just being a better citizen, being a better human being, right? We're never fully formed. We're all on a journey, right? And and we're all on different places of a journey too. So I want to share with you my journey with how I got to this spot here today. And I encourage you in my discussion of my journey to think about your own journey, and also to remind yourself, again, that we're all on these journeys. So that means especially, I think, to be kind with yourself and to be kind with others, right? You know, it's that fine line when you want to advocate for something that you know is right in your heart, but also not to turn your moral superiority into, not to weaponize it against other people, right? So that's what I would encourage you to do. As far as my journey, I should just share, I have this, I like to give lots of context, so I'm going to go way back. My grandfather, when we were interviewing him and my grandmother about how they met, my grandfather said, well, in 1942, Bell Aircraft was building this airplane. Well, my grandfather never worked for Bell Aircraft. I don't even know what that has to do. That is in my DNA, unfortunately. So I'm going way back, and I'm going to tell you that, as many of you know, I'm from upstate New York, and outside of Albany, a suburb called Delmar, which was nowhere as close to the ocean, but it was still called Delmar. And you know, in Albany, it's not a big city. I think maybe about 100,000 people. It's the state capital, but not exactly the cultural mecca of New York State. And then, of course, a suburb is even less maybe cultural, shall we say, a little bit more diluted. And of course, thinking about the people I grew up with in Delmar, they all looked a lot like me, right? A wholly predominantly white community. But at the same time, and this is of course looking back as an adult, I definitely didn't realize it at the time, but I think through, certainly through movies and TV shows and books, and I think also the way that American history was taught to us, that I thought that there are no racists in upstate New York, that racism happens someplace else, someplace south, right? Here in upstate New York, we are a home of progressive Mario Cuomo voting people, right? That racism is somebody else's problem, right? We are the people that have advocated for the abolition of slavery, and you know, we were on the right side of the Civil War, all those types of things. And you can, you know, you can see how you get lulled into that sense of history and your place in this country in the way that American history is taught, right? Especially to, you can't, there's not a heck of a lot of nuance being taught, especially at the middle school level. Anyway, that's where I grew up. Now, and I suppose I would have had that kind of insulated life, and who knows if I would have even ended up here in Denver or the other places I've been in this country, lived in this country, had it not been for music. Okay, music is what kind of cracked in there and started opening things up. And I would probably have to credit my mom, who'll be thrilled. She's going to be watching this on the live stream later, and she's going to be saying, oh boy, what's he going to say? But my mom had some pretty good taste in music. And she certainly had some good taste in the music being made by black musicians in the 1970s and 1980s. So I can remember riding around to my piano lesson, and she'd have Luther Vandross on in the car, or the Commodores. I can still remember her 8-track, you remember 8-tracks? In her Pontiac Firebird, she had a Commodore's 8-track in there. Now that is class, man. Okay? And Earth, Wind, and Fire, and groups like that. So I was hearing music being made by people that did not look like me, right? That had different backgrounds than me, that had different American experience than I was having. So she gets credit for that first introduction. And then, of course, along the way, I'm introduced to jazz music, right? And I start, you know, as I'm getting older, middle school, high school age, I start getting more and more into jazz. And I start discovering musicians for myself. You know, I really get into Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life. What an incredible album that is. You know, Duke Ellington, Thelonious Monk, John Coltrane, right? These are all musicians, look different than me, had it, you know, lived at a different time than I do, and that certainly had a different American experience. But still, I'm doing this music with a bunch of people that do look like me, right? In the jazz band at our high school, it's all white kids, led by a white instructor, right? So it's this interesting juxtaposition, right? Where we are experiencing the music of folks different than us, and we're trying to bring that music to life. So it held that way all the way up until college. And then I went to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. All right, so now, of course, right there, okay, now we're getting, just going to a city like Pittsburgh immediately broadens one's understanding of the world and our country than just staying in Del Mar, New York. While, of course, so now I'm making music with musicians that don't look like me, right? With black musicians. And meeting folks, and it was really very fulfilling. And it kind of all came to a apex, I suppose, of this kind of integration when in my sophomore year at Carnegie Mellon, I had a solfege teacher who was African American. His name was Thomas Douglas. And Thomas and I had a nice relationship, and in fact, he would music direct shows for the drama department, and he asked me to assistant music direct a couple of those with him. And at any rate, he had Billy Porter. Do you all know who Billy Porter is? So this is in the late 90s, and so Billy Porter hadn't quite made it to big Billy Porter status yet, but he was on his way, and he was coming into town to direct a equity production of The Wiz. And it's kind of funny, I'm telling the story right now, considering that we're doing Wizard of Oz. But do folks know what The Wiz is, right? And he was asked, Thomas Douglas was asked, to music direct that show. Thomas was already engaged with something else, and he was kind of at this point in his career where he was looking to actually pivot to more classical music. He was less interested in doing the, funk and soul thing. And he said to the producer of the show, well, I'm not interested, I can't do it. I have a student, he doesn't look like he can play this kind of music, but he can play this kind of music. And I was hired out, and I look back on that and am incredibly grateful for the fact that he said that, because it was two things. One, it was permission giving, right? But it also was a little reminder to me that this is not of you. It's a part of you, but it didn't come from you, right? And this is a balance that we have in this discussion of cultural appropriation, right? And how we feel as white people singing music from, well, we'll get to this here in a second, the black spiritual tradition, right? So it was permission giving, but it was also at the same time a reminder that I had to work to be authentic. I had to work to make this music authentic. When we were in rehearsals, just the cast and I was only one of two white people there. So the whole thing had kind of flipped for me. That's a total opposite experience than what I had in upstate New York. So I was very grateful for that experience. It was a wonderful time. I'm going to kind of fast forward here so we can get through this. Of course, over the next 20 years or so, I've had wonderful experiences where I've been brought into African American musical traditions. But at the same time, if I'm really honest with myself, I think, well, how intentional have I been about that, right? The Wiz, that came to me. Other experiences have come to me. And where have I shown intentionality about reaching out and engaging with communities of color? And, you look back on it, it's like, well, I probably wasn't as good as I ought to have been. So let's come up to 2020. That gives you a little context. Now let's come up to the summer of 2020. Great times, right? The best times. Pandemic, all the stuff going on. And of course, the Black Lives Matters comes to the forefront in our national conversation. George Floyd, certainly, that affected all of us. And you think about just how horrible of a murder that was. For me, and I know this is going to sound funny, that wasn't the thing that got me to the core as much as something else that happened at that same time. Because I could kind of rationalize a bit as an upstate New Yorker. Well, that's just an angry white police officer. He's probably, I'm a Democrat, right? So I say to myself, that's just an angry white police officer. He's probably an angry Trump supporter. You can kind of rationalize it away that way. It's still awful, but in some weird way, it kind of makes sense. What got me even more was the woman in Central Park. Do you remember that? Amy Cooper, I believe was her name. And this gentleman walking his dog, Christian Cooper, I think was his name. And you saw the video from that. And I was like, well, wait a minute. She looks, other than the fact that I'm male, she's female, but she looks like all my friends. She's from New York. She's voting for all the same people and contributing to all the same candidates that I'm contributing to. And she did this. And of course, Christian Cooper could walk away from it, right? It didn't have the same life-altering level of violence, but it was still a deeply racist moment. And I'm sure if you had gone up to her the day before and asked her if she thought she had any racist tendencies, she probably would have said no. So it made me start to think, well, what's lurking inside of me? What are the racist tendencies that I have that I don't even know about? So this is all the context by which I entered this anti-racism workshop that the program staff did in the summer of 2020. And I'm really grateful to Clover and to Ian and Jason and everyone else for bringing us along on that. That program was through the Next Church, which is PCUSA affiliated. It was on Zoom. So the really neat thing about it was that we had a lot of folks participating from all over the country, representing a wide variety of congregations. They all of them weren't representing congregations of Montview's political leaning, let's say. There's some folks were coming from congregations with a much more diverse, purple, we'll say, political makeup. And the way it worked was we were all in a big group in this big Zoom room listening to the facilitator. And then we would break out into small groups of about 10 people, a cohort, and we would work with 2 facilitators in that small group where we kind of worked through some of the stuff that was talked about in the big group level. And then finally, you had a once-a-month coaching. And my coach was this woman, Leanne Hodges, who's from Washington, D.C., and she's a pastor there. And I was very interested to come into that first coaching session with her because I was wondering all the things I just shared with you, right? I've had these great experiences. I feel like I've gone beyond what the typical white male from upstate New York, very sheltered existence, has grown up with. I'm a little worried there might be some latent racist things in me, but I'm unclear as to what the next step might be. And she was fabulous. And it was probably about 15 minutes into that initial conversation, she said, well, what are your thoughts about reparations? And I thought, wow, okay, we're going there, 15 minutes. And I said, well, I think reparations are a good idea, and I'll vote for that when that comes up. And she immediately challenged me, and she said, well, no, what are you going to do to actively make reparations? And it was the first time that I had thought to myself, wait, I thought that's something the government should be doing. I'm supposed to be doing this? So she really challenged me to think about that, and over the next couple of sessions, we brainstormed together, how does this manifest itself through my work as your minister of music and as a musician in general? And I eventually came up with this idea, and that is of a reparations royalty. And this stemmed a little bit, the royalty concept stemmed a little bit from my dad complaining about having to pay ASCAP. My dad, in addition to being a lawyer, also had a brew pub in upstate New York for 10 years, and he couldn't figure out why he had to write a check to ASCAP. Do people know what ASCAP is? It's a society is what it is, they call it, but it's a collective of composers and authors, and it's an organization that collects royalties on the behalf of a composer. So every time a composer's piece of music is played down at Betcher Concert Hall, if that piece of music is still under copyright, right, the composer gets a small little cut of the ticket sale, okay? So my dad couldn't figure that out because he wasn't performing music at his brew pub, but what he did have were TVs, and the TVs were on, and the sound was on. And of course, there's music that's played during commercials and other parts of the shows on TV, and those pieces of music are under copyright, and ASCAP would like their money now, please. But what it did was it reminded my father that the TVs were adding to the ambiance and the experience of the brew pub. And I realized we need that reminder about the contributions of black music to our mainline Protestant American musical experience. And the way that that's going to impact us the most is not through one big check that we just write and send off into the sunset, and we can all congratulate ourselves for doing, right? But it is this practice. It's this constant reminder of every single time, and this is how I was conceiving it at the point, of a piece of music written by a black African-American composer or author, that we make a contribution. And so anyway, it was really exciting to conceive, to get to that point and to think about what this could be. And then I'll just finish up some of this history here for you before I start to jump into more about the actual program. From there, after our anti-racism work was finished, Leanne introduced me to her friend Brian Henn, who is the head of the Center for Congregational Song. And Brian then took this, he and I had a conversation, got really excited about this idea and said, I'd like to make this into a pilot program that we can communicate across the country to other churches that might be interested in doing the same thing. And that's what we did, and other churches started to sign on. And then, of course, NPR got wind of it, and that's when we were on NPR. But we haven't done much yet. It's an idea, but that was intentional, too. I wanted us to be back together as a congregation before we started to undergo this. So, what is the reparation royalty? How is this going to manifest itself here at Montview? Well, as I said, as I originally conceived of it, I was thinking to myself, well, setting this very kind of broad net, and that's an issue I have sometimes. I get kind of broad and need to get focused in. And my broad net was like, it's not as though it was just cut off with the spiritual. It's not as though black musicians were suddenly treated fairly after the abolition of slavery, right? So I saw it as a pretty wide-reaching thing. But in discussions with Brian, and then, of course, here at Montview with our worship and music and the arts committee, we did decide to narrow it down, and we did decide to draw the line at Negro spirituals. Now, my next talk will get into discussing why we're going to start calling them Negro spirituals. But you can also refer to them as spirituals. And if you look in our hymnal, they're referred to as African American spirituals. But the way that we're defining spirituals, and this is also something that's in flux, but most people agree, and of course, if you were here a few years ago when Craig Robertson gave his wonderful class on spirituals, you'll remember, Craig also defined it this way. The line there is a piece of music written by an enslaved person, okay? So that the spirituals, the Negro spirituals, date from that time of slavery. So when we talk about music from post-1865, that was written post-1865, we do not apply the word spiritual to that. We certainly don't apply the word Negro spiritual to that. Okay, so this is all music that were composed by enslaved persons, the spirituals. And that's where we decided to draw the line, okay? And obviously, we don't know exactly who wrote these pieces, right? But we know the community from which they sprung. And we certainly know that they were never paid for them, that they were never under copyright. What we also know is that music was and still remains to be hugely important, both to our worshiping life, but also to the American musical experience as a whole. And I'll get into that in a second. Let me talk to you about how the reparations royalties is going to work. I'll share with you quick, the choir is going to participate. The choir, Westminster Choir, I've always seen as a bit of a church within the church. And the way they're going to be participating is each and every time we rehearse or sing a spiritual in concert or in worship, we're going to set up an offering plate. And I'm encouraging our choir members to make a contribution to that offering plate each and every time. And again, it's working, I encourage them like ASCAP. It's not as though I'm expecting the choir to come with, a $100 bill each and every time we do a spiritual. But with these little increments, if each choir member gives $1, $2, $5, but every single time we're rehearsing a spiritual, that's going to add up pretty quick. And it's also going to be a really incredible reminder to us about what this music is. See, that's the thing I love about this idea. There's both a reparation component of an actual money component, but there's also this educational, transformative experience that I'm certain we're going to go through as a choir. And us as a congregation, I'm excited for that because I feel like that's there for us too. So the congregation as a whole is going to participate in 3 ways. One, we have a budgeted line item that's set aside from our operating budget each and every time we sing a spiritual or you listen to a spiritual in worship. $250 comes out of the WOMA worship operating budget and goes into a reparations royalty fund. Okay? And that's an equivalent amount of what we would pay a publisher for use of a piece on the Christmas concert, let's say, right? Like when we're renting out music, it's about $250. So that's an appropriate amount. The second way we're going to participate is that there will be a rubric, a couple sentences printed in the bulletin. Under every time there's a spiritual, the spiritual obviously listed as a hymn or listed as an organ prelude or listed as an anthem, the rubric will tell us this is a spiritual and this is how we are participating in the reparations royalty. The third way is that you, the congregation member, will also be invited if you're feeling moved to make a contribution on top of that. And of course, that is your decision on how frequent and how much you want to participate in that. But we will have this fund set up, and you can use through the normal means, either online or by check, make that donation to the Reparations Royalty Fund. As I said, what are my hopes for this program? is that, it took us 400 years to get to this spot. It's going to take us a long way. The problems of racism are not going to go away overnight, right? The original sin of slavery to the United States of America is not going to go away overnight. But this is a start, and it's part of our journey. And we've done work, but we can continue to do work, and this can be part of that. And there's obviously a money component to it, right? So this is going to allow us, the money is going to enable us to make amends, right, for the wrongs. Certainly, if you want to just think of it from a purely perspective of this beautiful music that no one was ever compensated for, right? You can think of it as that narrow, or you can widen it, of course, to the wrongs that Black people, African Americans have experienced throughout this entire history of our country. I think there's also an opportunity for us to really deepen our engagement with communities of color. We're setting this fund up, but it's not our intention to turn this into a grant application process, right? Where we don't want to flip this into another example of white supremacy, right? Where we are kind of, prove to us that you deserve this money, right? That is not what we want to engage in. What we want to engage in instead is we're going to be actively reaching out to musical communities of color and creating an authentic relationship, seeing, what does this mean to you? Do you even want to be part of this? A group that's going to hold us accountable. It could be several groups. It could be somebody that that you come to me and say, hey, are you familiar with this group? We should reach out to this group. And through that process, right, being more intentional, being active, I hope that we are able to deepen and build new, authentic relationships within our community here. And the final piece, my final hope, is this kind of transformative experience for us. I think music can crack open and make us realize things that otherwise our mind alone can't quite grasp, or maybe is not willing to grasp, right? And with the spirituals, just like I was sharing, listening to Stevie Wonder and the Commodores in my mom's car started to kind of crack that open. Well, the spirituals are there, and they've been there for all of us, right? It's been part of our mainline Protestant DNA for as long as you have all been alive. And I know this is the case, because if I sing to you, go tell it on the mountain, you sing back, if I sing, I've got peace like a river. How about, swing low, sweet chariot. Yeah, we got a little work to do on our pitches. How about, this little light of mine? Right? I can't do this with other hymns. Maybe Joyful, Joyful, maybe some Christmas hymns, but it is really a part of your DNA. How about, Kumbaya, my Lord? So let's talk about that spiritual for a second. How many of you have said, somewhat derogatorily, that's not a word, but how many of you have said, we're having a kumbaya moment? Right? I know I've said that repeatedly. All right, so this summer, I was introduced to a woman, Melanie DeMore, African-American singer and song leader, and fabulous, West Coast, Oakland-based, and she has worked with all different types of communities of all ages. And she's just excellent about drawing folks into the spiritual experience. And she opened up her workshop saying, we're all going to make a pledge. No one is ever going to say, we're having a kumbaya moment anymore. And we all laughed just like that. But then, you know, she went deeper than that and explained, kumbaya means come by here, right? It's got that dialect from the Gullah people, islands off of South Carolina and Georgia. And then she started contextualizing the meaning of that song, right? Someone's crying, Lord, kumbaya. That cry for help. And she starts relaying the story, putting us in the place of an African that's being woken up in the middle of the night, being taken away from their home, being taken away from maybe their parents or from their children, and being placed on a boat and sailing for 2 months across the ocean, having no idea where they're coming, and arriving here to America, and that, you know, and being sold into slavery, and of course, no connection to family, and you think about that. And then you go, that's where that song came from. Now all of a sudden the words kumbaya have a much deeper meaning, right? It isn't the fireside, let's hold hands thing that we think about when we say, let's have our kumbaya moment. There's a real deepness to that. See, I believe that we as Americans are indebted to hold the spirituals to the same kind of artistic and emotional and mental and spiritual, the other type of spiritual, standards that folks in Europe hold Bach, right? These spirituals are incredible music. They're an incredible way for us, if we approach them in an authentic and respectful manner, we can get a glimpse into what it must have been like, right? Just a glimpse, but a shared experience, a shared humanitarian experience, which is a beautiful gift that has been left to us. So, I'm going to play a little bit of Kumbaya, and we'll think about that for a bit. I'll think about it while I'm playing it, and then I think we'll open up to some questions at that point, okay? I'm excited to go on this journey with you all together. Are there any questions for me right now? We have a microphone set up right here, and I guess Clover's either has a question or is going to... Oh. Oh, there you
There
go.
it is. Okay. So I'm going to bring this around if you have a question rather than having you come up here. But you do need to use this because we have this live streamed and it's great for the people at home. Any questions for Adam about this program? Yes, Bob.
Adam, thank you for doing this. I just wanted to make a comment because I know you mentioned the term cultural appropriation. You also talked about how hard you have worked on this and the appreciation of spirituals in our DNA. I think cultural appropriation only occurs when there's laziness involved. You are certainly not doing cultural appropriation with all the hard work you're putting in here. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Adam, I know we talked about this in choir too. Could you speak to the possibility of broadening this out, for example, Native American music or Native American experience the same way?
Yeah, I thought it was important that we start with the certain parameters, right? But what I think is going to happen for all of us, and I know it's happening for me, you uncover one truth, and then that leads to other truths that you begin to uncover. And again, it's never done, right? And it's a little bit like jumping down the rabbit hole, right? So today, where we stand right now, our Reparations Royalties Project only applies to spirituals. But what we do in the future, I think, is for us to find out. Just as long as we keep going with intention and authenticity and hard work, I think that we are going to start uncovering other truths that are going to lead us into other directions.
Very good. Thank you.
Adam, I especially like your effort to avoid the typical paternalism of philanthropy, which is, you tell me how much you deserve the money and I will give it to you. But I'm interested in the practical aspects of the alternative approach. How do you decide what to do, and how will these funds be distributed to realize their purpose?
Yeah, so when you say how do you decide what to do, could you put a little bit more detail behind that question, Paul, if you wouldn't mind?
You're going to generate funds. Where are we going to spend them?
Yes, right. So this is the kind of amorphous, an intentionally amorphous aspect of this pilot program that I've decided to run it this way. And that is our Worship and Music and the Arts Committee is going to be very proactive about this, researching communities both within Denver, but then broader too. It doesn't necessarily have to be limited to Denver. That would be interested in partnering with us in so much as they would like to receive these funds. Not every community might be interested. We have to recognize that too. Other churches have not done it exactly the same way. So, for instance, the church in Boston that was also featured on this NPR article, they decided they did not want to begin this reparations royalty project until they were already in a relationship and already knew to whom the money would be going. I felt that we weren't there yet, that this process, again, was going to reveal truths to us that would allow us to then become into a more authentic relationship with community. So there is a certain ambiguity to it. We're letting a little bit of, let's see where the Spirit leads us. But we do have our Worship and Music and the Arts Committee involved with that. And I hope to get the choir board involved with some of that decision making too. So there is a body of folks that will be discussing it, but it also won't necessarily go down as like a grant application process.
Anyone else? Kate. Oh, Cindy. We'll go. Sorry.
I think it would be really helpful once these organizations have been identified for our congregation to get a lot of information, or at least some, about those organizations, because that's how this is going to expand all of our minds on all.
I agree. But I think it's important that we do it in a way where the onus is not on them, right? That's another kind of trap that we've fallen into in the past, is that there's an expectation, well, you come to us, right? I have a lot of African American friends that are kind of tired. They're like, we've been trying to get you all to figure this out for a while. You all need to do the work on your own. So as we present those organizations, I totally agree. I would like us to do it in a way, though, that, again, puts the onus on us, that we're the ones that are reaching out to them, that we are actively engaging with them, not making them feel obligated to come here and show off for us or something like that.
There is a group here in Denver called the Spirituals Project that has been doing this very work for 10 years. They recently moved under the umbrella of University of Denver, Lamont School of Music, and they have a mission statement that is directly related to what you're saying, Adam. And I think that anybody who is seriously interested might want to go see what they do, and I hope that we will work with them.
Yeah, Spirituals Project, Roger Holland is the director, and Arthur Jones before him. Fantastic what they're doing. Thank you for mentioning them, Kate.
I'm actually visiting from Oklahoma here to see my granddaughter in
welcome.
the play this afternoon. But as you were talking, especially telling the story of Kumbaya, I recall a very old Krista Tippett interview when it was called Speaking of Faith even, of a man named Joe Carter who told the stories of many of the spirituals. And it occurs to me that as you told us the story of Kumbaya, that brings it closer to us and to our understanding. And maybe as you're singing these songs in your worship service, those stories could be told through the bulletin or somehow to engage the congregation further.
That's a great idea. And I love this fact that already there's wonderful ideas bubbling up, right? That this is what this is about, is for us as a community to show this to ourselves, right? Again, not for this, of course I'm going to be a leader in it, but I love hearing these thoughts, and for you to engage with each other about it is just fantastic.
Adam, we'll call that a session. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Adam for this wonderful, not only session, but this call that you have, Adam, the call that you have felt, and the journey you're taking us all on, which is really a gift.
And just a reminder, October 30th, right? And I think we'll be over in Miller Center.
Correct.
I presume,
do you want to say a word about what that will be?
Well, we're going to get a little bit more into the history of spirituals at that point. I really felt as though this first session would be great to contextualize just how we got to this reparations royalty idea. But our next session is going to dive into history of spirituals, both how they were created, but then what they created in their wake. right? The musical history that came after the spirituals. So, and I hope to be joined by a couple of special guests for that one too. So October 30th, would love to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.